ईसा अलैहिस्सलाम की हयात साबित करने के लिए मा qataluho मा salaboohu आयत का हिस्सा पेश किया जाता है। आइए देखते हैं कि मशहूर वहाबी आलम इस बारे में क्या कहता है।
Welcome back, everyone. Now it's time for a question and answer session where we answer some of our viewers' questions. And so, Brother Shabir, let's get on with the first question. So, Muslims believe that Jesus did not die on the cross, but rather he was switched with someone else on the cross. Now, some of the arguments that Christians pose is that if that is the case, will Jesus' disciples not deceived?
The question here comes from the direction of a person who's been reading the Gospels, familiar with the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible, and familiar with the development of Christian history, and is thinking, well, the cross became central to the Christian preaching, starting with the disciples of Jesus. So how did that happen if Jesus was not on the cross? And if somebody else was put on the cross, as Muslims believe, then not only were outsiders deceived, but even the disciples of Jesus were deceived, and then the whole religion that they started with their preaching as a result of what they saw would obviously be something contrary to Islam. So how could that be in the plan of God, to deceive the disciples like this? Now, answering from the Muslim point of view, we should say that when classical Muslim scholars developed this idea that somebody else was put on the cross instead of Jesus, they worked with a story that is attributed to Ibn Abbas, one of the early Muslim commentators on the Quran, a companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Ibn Abbas is reported to have said that when Jesus knew that his enemies were coming to arrest him, he asked his disciples for a volunteer who would take his place on the cross, and the youngest of them volunteered for that position. And in the meantime, Jesus was taken up into heaven through a hole in the roof, perhaps, where he was staying. And when his enemies came in to arrest him, Judas identified the person who now was made to look like him, this volunteer. And that volunteer was then taken and put on the cross in the mistaken belief that he was actually Jesus. But on this view, the Muslim scholars would maintain that the disciples of Jesus knew the score. They knew, because they were asked for a volunteer. And so they knew that Jesus was taken up into heaven and that someone else was put on the cross instead of Jesus. But then the classical Muslim commentators had to deal with the fact that it is so widely reported among Christians that Jesus was crucified. And they said in response that, well, we can't believe what the Gospels narrate, even though the narrations are now so widespread. It could have started out as a mistaken view by some people who thought they saw Jesus on the cross, and that view came to be attributed to the disciples of Jesus, who otherwise knew what the score was. So that's one approach. The other approach is to look at the Quran very closely and ask, what is the Quran really denying here by denying the crucifixion of Jesus? It seems that Surah 4, verse 157, is not actually denying that Jesus was put on the cross. It's only denying that his enemies had the upper hand on him to the extent of killing him on the cross. Here, crucifixion has the distinctive meaning of killing a person by means of crucifying him, by means of putting him on a cross. So the Quranic statement, ma qataluho wa ma salaboohu, simply means they did not kill him by some ordinary means, nor did they kill him by the specific means of crucifixion. The classical Muslim scholars wanted to avoid what they noticed to be a sort of repetition here, because if the first term is they did not kill him, and the second term is they did not crucify him, it could not mean they didn't kill him, nor did they kill him by crucifixion, because they did not kill him seems general, it excludes crucifixion or any other means. But the same sort of apparent repetition exists in the Quran in another verse, in Surah 5, verse 33, where the same two terms are juxtaposed, killing and crucifixion. And there it is quite clear that crucifixion means to kill a person by means of this particular method of crucifixion. So there too a sort of repetition would be involved, unless we understand that killing there has the meaning of killing by some ordinary means, and crucifixion obviously it means killing by the particularly gruesome method of crucifixion. So in that case, The Quranic denial, ma qataluho wa ma salaboohu, simply means they did not kill him by some ordinary means, nor did they kill him by the extraordinary means of crucifixion. Once we take that view, the objection drops automatically in that it allows for the development of Christian history. It allows for the basic truth of the gospel material in so far as they narrate that people could see Jesus on the cross. But the one distinction we would make is that when people thought they saw him die, he wasn't actually dead, because when you look at a person from the foot of the cross, he appears to be dead, but unless you check his pulse, unless you use certain methods of investigation, you would not be sure that the person is dead. It is very possible, and it seems even likely, that he was taken down from the cross alive.
एक और वीडियो में हम देख सकते हैं कि इसी वहाबी आलम बशीर ने इस आयत के बारे में मजीद तफसील से बात की है। आइए ये भी सुनते हैं।
Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
We are continuing our series on misunderstood Quranic verses, and the verse we have today is from chapter 4, verse 157. It says, "They killed him not, nor crucified him," and it is obviously referring to Jesus, on whom be peace.
Yeah, this verse, Sophia, has become the subject of so many debates between Muslims and our Christian friends, both in public arenas, but also privately. You know, a Christian friend will come up to a Muslim and, say, look at this verse, it's denying the crucifixion of Jesus. They say that it's well established in history that Jesus was crucified, and how could your book deny that he was crucified? This book is denying a fact of history, and therefore the book must be wrong. And a Muslim in this situation would go back to the classical interpreters of the Quran and scholars who are trained in the classical tradition, and would hear, somebody else was made to look like Jesus, put on the cross instead, and that person was crucified, while people believe that this was Jesus. But that leads to other problems. People may say, well, that would mean that God is, in a way, causing this kind of deception to occur, placing somebody else on the cross, making the people think that this is Jesus on the cross. Even Imam al-Razi, in his commentary on the Quran, pointed out to a problem for Muslims in if we think that things happen in scenarios like this. Because for, let's say, two persons are getting married, the man's name is Zaid, everybody has been witness to that, and later on somebody says, well, how do you know that was actually Zaid? What if somebody else was made to look like Zaid? And then Imam Razi's answer is that, well, you can always say that with Jesus was a one-off miraculous situation, and that's not going to be encountered in daily life. But still it leaves a sort of a possibility open that at any point somebody might be changed to look like somebody else for whatever reason best known to God in his wisdom, and so on. Al-Imam al-Razi, having combed all of the traditions about this, to see where did the classical Muslim commentators before him get the information from, tracing it all back and so on, he says in the end that all of these reports are contradictory one to another, because typically the commentators did was they went back to the gospel stories and they tried to find at which juncture in the story could we imagine somebody being switched to look like Jesus and taking his place, while most of the people were unaware of this happening. And they arrived at different junctures. Like one said, for example, Jesus was in a room with his disciples and picked one of them by a volunteer to take his place. Another said that Judas Iscariot, who came to arrest him, was the one who was changed to look like Jesus. Another report says that when Jesus was arrested and placed under a Roman guard, the Roman guard was made to look like Jesus, and then he was arrested and he was put on the cross and so on. So Imam al-Razi says, هذه الوجوه متعارضة متدافعة والله أعلم بحقائق الأمور. These various interpretations are conflicting, mutually contradictory, and God knows the truth of the matter. But Imam al-Razi himself proposed another thing, which is more along naturalistic lines. He said that the governor at the time didn't want Jesus to be killed. This seems to be a reflection on what is known of Pilate from the Gospels, though this is thought to be not historically accurate. Nonetheless, Imam al-Razi says that the governor, wanting to pacify the masses, got a person, dressed him up to look like Jesus and had that person crucified. And because people were at a distance and it was a little dark, they didn't quite make out. Now, he's obviously given a very naturalistic type of explanation here. But whether this fits the historical circumstances and what historians would agree with, this is now an issue. And it always comes back to Muslims. Now, some who debate against Christians, they take a harsh stance and they say, well, this is the truth. You must accept it. Otherwise, you go to hell and so on. But if we are trying to give historical argumentation and so on, and reason and evidence and proof, then it looks like Muslims need to have a better way of interpreting this passage. Okay, so Surah 4, verse 157 says, "Ma qataluho wa ma salaboohu." They killed him not, nor did they crucify him. To avoid repetition, the classical commentators said that crucify here must not mean they didn't kill him, because that would be they didn't kill him and they didn't kill him.
Yes.
But it must mean they didn't even put him on the cross. So they didn't kill him, nor did they even put him on the cross. That's a classical interpretation. And hence they have to find somebody else who was put on the cross, because they all agree there was a crucifixion event. Everybody saw like Jesus is on the cross. So how do you explain that? So other aspects of the verse fall into play here, but to keep the discussion brief for the moment, look at this word crucifixion. Elsewhere in the Quran, the word seems to mean that you hang a person until they die. So when the Pharaoh in the story of Moses threatens the magicians after they believed in Moses, he says, "لَوْ قَطَّعَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ مِنْ خِلَافٍ ثُمَّ لَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ." I will cut off your arms and legs from opposite sides, and then I will crucify you, all of you together.
Sounds gruesome.
Yes. So Yusuf Ali, in his translation of Surah 7, verse 124, puts it that Pharaoh is saying to them, after I cut off your hands and legs, I will put you to die on crosses. So I will cause you to die by hanging you on crosses, something to this effect. He took it meaning to be that crucifixion means, putting the person to die. Abdul Majid Daryabadi, in his translation of the Quran and commentary, gave the classical interpretation in the translation itself. But in his notes to the translation, he defined crucifixion as the act of putting a person to death by means of crucifixion, by means of hanging them on a cross. So you see this inherent meaning there. Now we find this in the Quran as well, elsewhere. Surah 5, verse number 33 speaks about the crime of hiraba, of what is called highway robbery in classical Islamic law. But the Quran says those who wage war against God and His Prophet, their reward or their punishment is an qataluho aw salaboohu. Either they should be killed or crucified. Because there is an or, it means it's one or the other. Now, how would one be crucified if it's not by killing? In fact, everyone interprets this verse to mean that it's the person will be, the crucifixion here would involve death. So the person might be killed by some other means and then hung up as a deterrent to others. That means his dead body. So the crucifixion here is the hanging up of a dead body. Or the person may be hung up alive and then a spear may be thrust into the stomach of the person, thus killing this highway robber. Of course, this too would be inappropriate in our present circumstances, but how to apply this verse and so on, that's another discussion. But what does the word crucifixion here mean? It means, it implies death, either death by some other means and then hanging up the dead body, or hanging the body until it dies. In either case, we have a dead body on the cross. So you mean
the way the Quran interprets crucifixion is that it entails death. It's not just death. Putting somebody up on a cross if they don't end up dying.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So when we go back to Surah 4, verse 57, then we see that the repetition is avoided once we understand that crucifixion involves death. But it is, yes, on the surface it might look like there is a repetition, but only when we realize that crucifixion is an extraordinary means of killing. So that's why it's mentioned separately. So they did not kill him, ma qataluhu, by some general means or some usual means. Wa ma salaboohu, they did not even kill him by that extraordinary means of crucifixion. Now we find repetition like this in the Quran elsewhere. For example, in alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa aqamu salata wa atu zakah, those who believe and do good deeds and establish prayer and give charity. Now, establishing prayer and giving charity are part of doing good deeds. So why mention them again? It's like doing good deeds and doing good deeds. But it's doing, when the two are mentioned in juxtaposition like this, doing good deeds now must be taken to mean doing good deeds in a general way, and then doing the prayers and giving charity. These are very specific and very important, significant good deeds, and that's why they are mentioned separately. In a similar way, they did not kill him by some ordinary means. وَمَا salaboohu, they did not kill him by means of crucifixion. Now, if Muslims took this line of argumentation, then we're not saying we were there on the scene and we know exactly how it happened, but we're saying now that by looking at the Quran from this light, it is not necessary to defend the idea that somebody else was made to look like Jesus and put on the cross instead of him, with all of the historical discussions that ensue from that.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro.
You're welcome.